And we are recording. Welcome, Kevin. Thank you
Thank
so
you,
much for
Meredith. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for taking time out of your what I assume is a very busy life and schedule, because you are taking on so much in the mental health world, and have been for quite some time. So I would love to hear a little bit about you. I've been reading about you, but I would love to hear a little bit about your journey with Hurdle, but also your life in Washington, D.C.
Wow. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation to be here today. I think, part of my job is also telling my story, which is also how I got to this point of being focused on mental health. So although these are really busy days, it's really important that I make the time to have these types of conversations, because I think it's critical to the success of what we're doing. And so I'm grateful for the opportunity. But you asked a pretty loaded question, and I'm not even sure where to begin. I guess I would say, when I was a young adult and when I was thinking about what I wanted to be when I grew up, after sort of rejecting a couple identities, I decided that I wanted a career in public health. And I really made a commitment to myself to always be working on the most pressing public health issues of the day. And so that meant, I worked on HIV/AIDS, I worked on childhood obesity. I started my career in tobacco control, doing a lot of work at the American Cancer Society. And and professionally, I was consulting a few years ago, and I really started to think about mental health. And I particularly got really focused and um, almost sort of dogged about the mental health of Black men. And I really wanted to start to frame mental health as a public health priority. And that was sort of how I was thinking about it professionally. And I made this correlation between unmanaged stress and untreated mental health issues and the low life expectancy of Black men. Black men happen to have the lowest life expectancy of any population group in the US. And, and so, I thought that that was a pretty important issue, and I was trying to raise attention to that issue with, people who I was working with at the time, like major foundations, national associations. And I really couldn't get any traction in saying, this is a priority. We need to do something about
And
this.
how long ago was this? This was like 10 years?
This thing has been evolving for probably about 7 years.
Okay,
Right?
7 years. And by the
Yeah,
way, Kevin, when you describe your younger life, it sounds like you're a superhero, just like going after the biggest enemies, just like the tobacco industry. Like each one is massive. Like childhood obesity, you were just like tackling the biggest enemies of humanity. And now it's almost like you landed on this one as a really big one.
Yeah, it's funny. So I honestly didn't intend to, and it wasn't as strategic as it sounds like it was. And, the story goes that, I kept trying to get people to pay a little attention to this issue. And I was working on these other issues, as we both just mentioned. And I was trying to grow my consulting practice and work myself into mental exhaustion. And that led to a period of depression. And I struggled to find a therapist who I could connect with. I would later learn that that was not unusual. In fact, 50% of African Americans terminate therapy prematurely because of provider fit. That number is 33% in the general population. So my experience was not unique. But after my depression, and my depression literally like paralyzed my professional life, because I thought for a living. So if you're depressed and you think for a living, it just doesn't work. And so after the depression, I thought that I would go back to my consulting practice and try to rebuild it. And, my co-founder asked me this really life-changing question. And that was on October the 24th of 2017, and he asked me, had I ever considered doing anything in digital health? And literally in that moment, my professional experience, like sort of my thinking and framing about mental health, as well as, what I had recently experienced personally sort of collided. And Henry Health, we've since then rebranded to Hurdle. But in that moment, the company was born.
That sounds like a lightning bolt connection of all the elements that were already there in your life, just suddenly making sense and taking shape. That's also,
think that's how life works. I mean, I think that is, if we will stop and pay attention to like what's really happening, there are always these nudges and sort of pushes that push us where we need to be, into the place we need to be, working with the people we need to be. We just have to sort of be sensitive enough to take the nudges.
did you feel, working now for these past years, like people started finally listening to the things that you were talking about? Like, how long did it take? I started in 2015 on my site, Beautiful Voyager. And, for the first few years, it just felt like people pitied me. I was like, I'm interested. I find this fascinating. But people like sort of pitied me. But it's changed. So I'm wondering like how it changed for you.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for, sharing that and your candor. When you have an idea in the early days, you're right. People will pity you. They'll talk to you. Some people will outright ignore you because they know you're going to have an ask that they don't want to deliver on. And so, for me, the first couple years of even just trying to stimulate the conversation, I found to be incredibly challenging. And I think that was for a number of reasons. Number one, I don't think I was as skilled as telling my story as I am now. I mean, a lot of the work you're doing when you're trying to build a company is about storytelling. You need to be able to tell a story very concisely. So I don't believe that I was as skilled at telling my story as I should have been. And then secondly, the consciousness of the country, I say, was just not where it is today. Because remember, we started our company super focused on serving Black men. Now, remember, I am trained as a public health person. So, I always sort of think about disease control in the sense of who's the most vulnerable, right? So we see that even today, like with the pandemic, how we focused on seniors first, then we focused on people with pre-existing conditions, and we're just now sort of getting to a place where, all people above 18, and now because of the variants, it's pretty clear that we're going to have to even lower that to people above 16. So you see, it's all about prioritization. So for me, when I started Henry Health, it was really because I saw Black men as this most vulnerable population and as it relates to mental health. And to be honest with you, I just think it was really hard when you're that niche to get people's attention, because people just didn't see it as a problem that they could relate to, or that they were particularly interested in solving. And so, last year, before the pandemic, we started to do some work around our brand. And the idea was that we would build communities. And our first community was going to be a community for Black men. And that felt pretty good morally for me, because it felt like I had not abandoned the idea of Black men. And I was, finding a way to signal to investors that I was very interested in serving other populations, that the business could be a much bigger business. And so we started to do that work on the brand. And then the pandemic hit. And then, after the pandemic, what is it, maybe like a month and a half or 2 months later, the death of George Floyd happened. And, the death of George Floyd, I think historically, we're going to look back at this period and we're going to realize that we went into this period of racial reckoning like none other. It's the only thing that would probably be equivalent would be the 60s, right? And so I think that for us as a company, what we were sort of saying about the mental health care system, all of a sudden, although people knew it intellectually, right? They've always known this intellectually. The data's there, the data doesn't lie. But now the heart was connected to the hand, the consciousness was connected to the head rather. And I think, something happened in that moment to help give the company more life. People understood that our mental health system at face value is not a system that works for everyone. It's just point blank, like no one can make the argument. Number one, we know the system is highly flawed to begin with. But then number two, when you start to sort of peel back the layers of it and you think about sort of historically how the system was built, it was built for middle-class white families. There in the early days, people did not even believe that Black people had the cognitive awareness for therapy. So these things are sort of deeply, deeply rooted. And, the thesis of our company is that we need to reimagine what mental health looks like. And we need to prepare therapists to support people who they may not have the bank of experiences in life to relate to culturally. So that's the thesis of our company. It's always been the thesis of our company. It's not changed. It's just now the consciousness of the country is different. And I think we know how to articulate that a little bit clearer.
That's amazing. I mean, what an amazing journey in such a short period of time where you've always said the same thing, but now suddenly everyone is listening, or more people are listening, more people are interested. I'm really interested, just looking at the Hurdle site, in how you describe the clinical best practices on top of cultural responsiveness. Now, is that like a training that Hurdle provide? Like, how does it work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So first of all, I always say to my team, I am our first client, meaning like my experience. So much of what we do and how we do it is really rooted in my own personal mental health journey. And over the years, I've written about my own mental health and what it was like to experience depression. And, for me, when I realized I was depressed, I went to my primary care physician and I was telling him that I was depressed. And he gave me like a 7-page printout of therapists, 3 columns on each page. And it was literally just this game of like, okay, who am I going to choose?
I know.
Long story short, I saw 3 therapists before I found Dr. Tony Spann, who would later come and help us set up the foundation of our company. And when Oliver asked me that question in October 24 of 2017, I went back to Tony and said to him, hey, I know that there was something different about what you were doing with me in therapy. Although I was depressed, I knew that, okay, this dude's doing something different. Like I could tell. And he went on to tell me that he was using a technique. And now, we work with a professor who created this technique, and we train our therapists in this technique. And the technique helps our therapists develop more humility and responsiveness. Because remember, as I pointed out earlier in our discussion,
Love that.
the provider fit, our forming therapeutic alliance is the most difficult thing to overcome in the early days of therapy, like whether or not we can form a connection. And so our technique increases the responsiveness of the therapist, and helps equip them with more humility. The truth of the matter is, right, like when we look at our mental health care system, less than 4% of our therapists in the country are people of color, right? So that means and certainly on the heels of the pandemic, mental health is the pressing public health issue. There's no doubt about it. So this means we have to equip our workforce with the ability to meet the needs of everyone. Like that is a fundamental must. And even more so, we need to be working on our pipeline to make sure that we can bring more providers of care into the workforce. Providers of color, I'm sorry, I said providers of care.
No, I knew what you meant. That makes perfect sense. Kevin, something that's really resonating with me is how difficult it is for everyone to find a therapist that fits. For example, I went to 5 different therapists in my life, none of whom spotted that I had an anxiety disorder. I was suffering, I was physically suffering, I had all these other issues, but no one spotted it until a neurologist. And I am a white woman, a white middle-class woman. So I can just imagine how it's already a problem. And then you go to this next level of 4% of people, and it becomes, an exacerbated problem. And I find super interesting the fact that humility and responsiveness, understanding what to listen to, is the core special sauce of what you're working to implement. And I really applaud that. I think that has been a missing piece in my lifetime. And, many therapists have all the right intentions. They are there for the right reasons. They just don't seem to always have the skill set to see a different reality or to tune in, to get out of their own head and get into what's happening with the other person. And I'm not sure why that is. I just know what my experience has been. So this work seems so, so important. If there was one thing, let's say that I share this with my audience, like what would you like people most to know about how to get involved with Hurdle? Or, what would you be looking for in terms of reaching people? Are you hoping that therapists will join Hurdle? Like how does it work?
Yeah. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing your story. When you shared your story, it reminded me of a quote I read once that said that once you become aware of your own suffering, then and you're able to overcome it, then you can see so many others as suffering around you. And for me, that's what my depression was like or has been like. When I overcame my depression, I could look around and I could see people who were depressed and who didn't even know that they were depressed. And, to be honest with you, had I not been so dogged in like my sort of public health understanding of mental health, I probably would have been dismissive of my own depression and just thought that, quote, I was going through a bad phase in life, or either, religiously, I would have just probably equated it to, quote, the dark night of my soul. So first of all, I just want to say thank you for sharing your story. I think more of us who are honest about our own experiences, we're going to help normalize this. But to your question, yeah, we're recruiting therapists, and we're currently providing office services in DC, Maryland, and Virginia. We're laying down the foundation to expand to California, Massachusetts, and we'll pick 2 more states for this year. So certainly people who are interested, therapists, licensed professional therapists, social workers who are interested in like our vision, they should visit our website and join us. And I think in a broader context, people who might listen to this conversation, the broader message I think that's important to deliver right now is that we have been through a really difficult patch. And anxiety, isolation, depression, like these numbers are skyrocketing now. And I think it's really important for all of us to reframe what we think mental health looks like. Like we need to reject the notion that mental health is only the most severe conditions, that, that anxiety, depression, isolation, that these are serious mental health issues, that if they're not tended to, if you don't treat people with empathy as they're experiencing these issues, that, they can lead to dangerous consequences. And so I think in a larger context, what I would say to people, even if people are not in our service territory, to be really aware of what's going on, not only with yourself, but certainly with your friends and loved ones.
And that you can find help, even though it doesn't feel like it, even though you may have tried once or 5 times and you didn't find that connection, that there are other ways to do it. And there are evidence-based strategies. It's not easy. Many people do not find their right fit the first go around. But it's just, and that's such a hard thing to convince people, because you're already vulnerable when you're trying to reach out for help. You're already beaten down. It's so hard to then finally gather the courage to reach out and then have that's why I think I still have a lot of baggage around therapy. Is I reached out, I didn't know what I was looking for. I wasn't able to say to the therapist, I have an anxiety disorder, please treat that. And therefore they weren't able to help me. And so I think, I completely understand why people avoid that or would feel like it isn't going to help. But I want voices like yours to be heard, because it is possible to find people that you can relate to. And I would imagine many people feel when they see you and they hear you and talk to you, that they can relate to you. So even though you're a superhero and you're fighting the biggest enemy.
That's so kind of you. No, I mean, I just really, first of all, your persistence and, attempting 5 times, I mean, that just shows how persistent you were in acknowledging, I know I can be in a better position than I am. And I think that that's how a lot of people are operating right now. And, helping them understand that it may not be you. You may be experiencing something that you can get help with is, I think, going to be critically important to, what I would call this is, when the president forms his task force and he starts to think about the recovery from the pandemic, mental health should be on the recovery.
People have said we need a mental health head of mental health for our country. Now, Vivek Murthy was an amazing voice for mental health, but trying to get, a more formalized role does.
Now he has said that he will make mental health one of 3 priorities. And to be honest with you, I didn't even put the other 2 in my mind.
Me too, by the way. Same. Me too. Same. I was like, well, he said that one. I'll take it.
Yeah, I'll take that. But I just think that this is, I do think it's the public health issue of the day. And there is so much suffering. The numbers, I was reading a report the other day about the numbers of depression and isolation, particularly with adolescents. I think we're really on the heels of some serious problems. And then, when schools open back up, because people sort of not been socialized, and that's going to open up a whole new problem.
And people at work. Even people going back into the office.
Yeah, we're just at the beginning of really understanding this thing. But that's why the work that you're doing and having these types of conversations to help frame where we are is going to be super important.
Kevin, I can't thank you enough for taking time. Getting to talk to you is just an energy bullet for me. It's just knowing you're out there doing this work. And I'm really excited to share this with other people and just keep an eye on Hurdle. I'm excited to see what happens with Hurdle in the future. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you. And thank you for the work that you're doing. Thank you for your courage in sharing your own personal story as well.